Hollywood's golden age looked like pure glamour. Spotlights, silk gowns, perfect smiles. But behind the velvet curtains, a darker system quietly ruled careers. A whispered phrase followed young actresses through studio corridors. Some endured it silently. Others refused to stay quiet. Tonight, we uncover 15 Golden Age actresses who expose the secret power games that shaped old Hollywood. Shirley Temple. Few names symbolized innocence in early Hollywood more than Shirley Temple. By the mid-1930s, she was the most famous child star in the world. Audiences saw dimples, ringlets, and joyful musical numbers that seemed untouched by darkness. Yet years later, Temple would reveal that even the brightest star in Hollywood could encounter disturbing realities behind studio doors. In her autobiography, Child Star, she described an encounter with a powerful studio executive when she was a teenager. During a meeting, he suddenly exposed himself to her in what Temple described as a humiliating and deeply uncomfortable moment. The young actress simply laughed at him and walked out of the office. The man reportedly became embarrassed and quickly dismissed the situation. Temple later explained that incidents like this were quietly tolerated inside the studio system. Executives controlled contracts. They controlled publicity. They controlled careers. For many actresses, speaking out meant risking everything. Temple eventually escaped the studio system and built a new life in public service, becoming a respected diplomat decades later. But her story shattered the illusion that Golden Age Hollywood was a place of pure innocence. That behind the cheerful musicals and smiling publicity photos existed a power structure where young performers often had little protection. Temple's revelation became one of the earliest public acknowledgments that exploitation inside Hollywood had long been hidden behind glamour. And if even the most beloved child star could face such behavior, the question becomes impossible to ignore. What happened to actresses who were older and more vulnerable? Judy Garland. The voice of Judy Garland carried generations across the rainbow. Her performance in The Wizard of Oz turned her into one of the most beloved entertainers in cinema history. Yet behind the magic, Garland described a studio system that treated young performers less like artists and more like property. Working under contract at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, Garland was placed under strict surveillance. Executives monitored her weight, her diet, her sleep, even her friendships. Studio doctors reportedly gave her pills to keep her awake during long filming days and different pills to force sleep when production ended. Garland later spoke about how female performers were expected to remain obedient to powerful executives. The culture inside the studios was built on silence. Young actresses learned quickly that resisting authority could end their careers before they began. While Garland did not always speak explicitly about specific casting couch incidents, she described an atmosphere where powerful men held enormous personal control over young women's futures. Producers could make or destroy stars overnight. Her struggles with addiction and exhaustion later became tragic symbols of how the studio system consumed the very talent it created. Garland spent much of her life trying to regain control over her own career. In many ways, her story exposed the deeper machinery behind Hollywood glamour. It was not simply about individual misconduct. It was about an entire system where contracts and reputation could be used as tools of pressure. And for some actresses, the only way to survive that system was to confront it directly. Shelley Winters. Unlike many actresses of her generation, Shelley Winters refused to stay silent about Hollywood's darker traditions. Winters built a powerful career in dramatic roles, eventually winning 2 Academy Awards. But long before that success, she was a young performer navigating the complicated politics of studio power. In her memoirs, Winters openly described the casting couch culture that existed during the 1940s and 1950s. According to her stories, some producers expected romantic or personal relationships as an unspoken part of career advancement. She wrote that aspiring actresses often entered meetings knowing that the conversation might shift from professional discussions to personal expectations. Declining those expectations could quietly remove an actress from future projects. Winters refused to present herself as a victim. Instead, she described Hollywood as a battlefield where actresses needed both talent and resilience to survive. Her blunt honesty shocked readers when her books were published decades later. By revealing these stories, Winters forced audiences to reconsider the myth of the glamorous studio era. Beneath the polished publicity photos existed a system where personal power often overshadowed artistic merit. Her career continued successfully because she possessed extraordinary acting ability and an equally strong personality. Winters proved that confronting Hollywood's secrets did not necessarily destroy a career. Instead, it sometimes exposed truths that the industry had carefully hidden for decades. Kim Novak. When Kim Novak rose to fame during the 1950s, she quickly became one of Hollywood's most captivating stars. Her performance in Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo remains one of the most iconic roles in cinema history. Yet Novak later described how difficult it was to maintain independence inside the studio system. She worked under contract with Columbia Pictures, where studio head Harry Cohn reportedly exercised strict control over many aspects of his stars' lives. Novak spoke about the intense pressure placed on actresses to maintain specific public images and personal relationships that suited studio publicity strategies. The system rewarded obedience and punished independence. When Novak attempted to assert control over her career, she found herself battling powerful executives who believed the studio owned her public identity. In interviews, she described how actresses were often treated as carefully managed assets rather than creative collaborators. While Novak never framed her experiences solely through the language of the casting couch, she acknowledged that the studio environment often blurred the boundaries between professional obligations and personal expectations. Her resistance to that system eventually led her to step away from Hollywood at the height of her fame. It was a rare decision in an era when studios held enormous power over actors' contracts. By walking away, Novak proved that even the brightest stars sometimes chose freedom over fame. And that choice revealed just how restrictive the Golden Age system truly was. Mae West. Few figures challenged Hollywood hypocrisy more boldly than Mae West. Long before modern conversations about gender politics, West openly mocked the double standards that governed the film industry. Her stage career had already shocked audiences before she arrived in Hollywood during the early 1930s. West wrote her own material and controlled her public image in ways that few actresses of the era could imagine. Unlike many performers, West did not simply expose the casting couch through memoirs or interviews. She attacked the system directly through humor and satire. Her films often included sly jokes about powerful men attempting to control women's careers. Audiences laughed at the humor, but insiders understood the message beneath the dialogue. West once famously said that when a woman truly controls her own career, the entire system becomes uncomfortable. And that discomfort was exactly what she intended. Studio executives frequently clashed with her over content censorship. Yet her popularity with audiences gave her unusual negotiating power. By turning Hollywood's unspoken rules into punchlines, West exposed the hypocrisy of an industry that tried to appear respectable while quietly operating under very different standards. Her fearless attitude made her one of the earliest performers to publicly challenge the gender politics that shaped the casting couch culture of early Hollywood. And she did it with a smile and a perfectly timed line that audiences still quote today. Veronica Lake. The mysterious half-hidden gaze of Veronica Lake became one of the most unforgettable images of 1940s cinema. Her famous hairstyle, the peekaboo fringe, turned her into a symbol of seductive Hollywood glamour almost overnight. But behind that glamorous image lived an actress who later spoke honestly about the pressures young women faced inside the studio system. Lake arrived in Hollywood at a time when powerful producers controlled nearly every aspect of an actress' career. Studios decided which films she would make. They controlled publicity, They even influenced personal relationships that might shape a star public image. For many actresses, success depended not only on talent, but also on navigating the expectations of men who controlled opportunities. Lake later explained that the culture of Hollywood during that period was built on silent understandings. Meetings between actresses and producers could quickly move from professional discussions to personal propositions. The system rarely acknowledged these expectations openly. Instead, they existed as quiet rules everyone understood, but few dared to challenge. As Lake's career began to decline, she spoke more openly about the imbalance of power that shaped the studio era. The glamorous fantasy sold to audiences hid a professional environment where actresses had limited control over their own futures. Declining the wishes of a powerful producer could mean disappearing from major productions almost instantly. Lake's story revealed how quickly Hollywood could transform admiration into isolation. The same industry that created stars could quietly push them aside when they refused to play along with its hidden rules. For Veronica Lake, the real lesson of Hollywood fame was simple but unsettling. In the Golden Age, success often depended on surviving a system where power spoke louder than talent. And not every star was willing to accept that silence. Hedy Lamarr. To audiences, Hedy Lamarr was one of the most beautiful women ever to appear on screen. Her exotic elegance made her an international star during the 1940s. But Lamarr's life in Hollywood was far more complex than the glamorous image presented to moviegoers. Before arriving in America, Lamarr had already experienced the controlling influence of powerful men in the European film world. After escaping a restrictive marriage, she came to Hollywood hoping to build a career defined by creativity rather than control. Yet she soon discovered that the American studio system could be just as demanding. Producers promoted Lamarr primarily as a symbol of beauty rather than intelligence. This was ironic because Lamarr secretly worked on scientific inventions, including a radio guidance system that would later influence modern wireless technology. Hollywood executives rarely showed interest in that side of her mind. Lamarr later described uncomfortable situations where powerful figures attempted to shape her career through personal influence rather than professional respect. For many actresses of the era, meetings with producers were rarely simple auditions. They were moments where an actress' future could depend on how she navigated subtle pressure from men who held enormous authority. Rather than fully submitting to that system, Lamarr gradually distanced herself from studio control. She focused on personal projects and creative pursuits that allowed her independence. And today, Lamarr is remembered not only as a film star, but also as an inventor whose work contributed to technologies used in modern communication. Her story revealed how the studio system often underestimated the intelligence and ambition of the women it employed. Behind the glamorous publicity photos lived a woman determined to prove that actresses were capable of far more than the roles Hollywood assigned to them. Lana Turner. When Lana Turner was discovered at a soda fountain in Los Angeles, she seemed destined to become one of Hollywood's most glamorous stars. The story itself became part of movie legend. A young woman spotted by a talent scout suddenly transformed into a major studio attraction. But the reality of Turner's rise inside Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer was far more complicated than the fairy tale suggested. The studio system carefully managed every detail of her image. Publicity departments designed her persona. Producers determined the roles she would play. Her personal life often became part of the studio narrative used to sell films. Turner later explained that actresses of the era were frequently placed in situations where their relationships with powerful men could shape their careers. Hollywood gossip columns regularly speculated about connections between actresses and influential producers or directors. The pressure created an environment where ambition and vulnerability collided. Young actresses arrived in Hollywood hoping to achieve success, but quickly learned that the industry operated through a complicated web of personal alliances. Turner managed to maintain a successful career through talent determination and an understanding of how to navigate that world. Yet she later acknowledged that many performers faced uncomfortable expectations from the men who controlled studio productions. Her story illustrated the complicated balance actresses had to maintain during the Golden Age. They needed to protect their reputations while also working within an industry that often blurred professional and personal boundaries. For audiences, Lana Turner represented dazzling beauty and cinematic drama. But for historians, her career also reveals how the studio system shaped the lives of actresses whose ambitions placed them directly inside Hollywood's most powerful circles. Rita Hayworth. Few stars captured the imagination of the 1940s quite like Rita Hayworth. Her performances in films like Gilda turned her into one of the most recognizable faces of classic Hollywood. Soldiers during the Second World War even carried photographs of her as symbols of hope and glamour. Yet, Hayworth once delivered a line that perfectly captured the strange distance between Hollywood fantasy and real life. She famously said men went to bed with Gilda, but woke up with Rita Hayworth. The statement reflected the heavy expectations placed on actresses whose public image rarely matched their private identity. Hayworth worked under contract at Columbia Pictures, where studio chief Harry Cohn held enormous authority over productions and performers. Cohn's reputation as a demanding and sometimes intimidating executive was widely known throughout Hollywood. Biographers later described the intense pressure Hayworth experienced while working within this system. Her career was carefully shaped by executives who controlled scripts, publicity, and personal appearances. Even her transformation from Margarita Cancino into Rita Hayworth was part of a studio strategy designed to create a marketable star. The power imbalance between actresses and studio executives created an environment where resisting authority could threaten an entire career. Hayworth often struggled to maintain personal independence while fulfilling contractual obligations. Despite these challenges, she delivered performances that remain among the most memorable of the Golden Age. Her screen presence combined elegance, vulnerability, and quiet strength. Behind that brilliance, however, lived an actress navigating an industry where powerful figures often dictated the terms of success. Hayworth's story reveals how the casting couch culture was not always about explicit propositions. Sometimes, it was simply about control. And control was the currency that ruled Hollywood during its most glamorous era. Gloria Grahame. The quiet intensity of Gloria Grahame made her one of the most fascinating performers of film noir. She rarely played the obvious leading lady. Instead, she brought something sharper to the screen. Mystery, danger, vulnerability. In films like The Big Heat and In a Lonely Place, her performances revealed characters who lived in moral shadows rather than bright Hollywood light. But Grahame's career also unfolded inside the same studio power structure that shaped the lives of many Golden Age actresses. Hollywood during the 1940s and 1950s operated through relationships between producers, directors, and studio executives whose influence could define a performer's future. For actresses, this environment created constant tension. Auditions were not always simple artistic opportunities. They were meetings where powerful men evaluated not only talent, but also personality, obedience, and personal chemistry. Grahame later described the emotional pressure actresses faced when their professional survival depended on pleasing figures who controlled casting decisions. Unlike many performers, Grahame possessed a stubborn independence that often clashed with studio authority. While she refused to behave like a predictable studio creation, that independence sometimes made producers uneasy. Despite those tensions, she earned an Academy Award for her role in The Bad and the Beautiful, which ironically portrayed the manipulative power dynamics of Hollywood itself. The film offered audiences a rare glimpse of how producers could shape careers through personal influence. Grahame later spoke about the emotional toll of living inside such an environment. Actresses were expected to remain charming, cooperative, and grateful, even when facing uncomfortable expectations. Her story reminds us that the Golden Age produced unforgettable cinema, But it also produced an atmosphere where actresses constantly navigated a landscape of ambition, power, and vulnerability. And for Gloria Grahame, the greatest challenge was not performing on screen. It was surviving the reality behind it. Jane Russell. Few actresses were introduced to Hollywood with more controversy than Jane Russell. Her first film, The Outlaw, became famous before most audiences even saw it. The reason was not the story. It was the publicity campaign, created by eccentric billionaire producer Howard Hughes. Hughes believed scandal generated attention. He designed posters that emphasized Russell's appearance and promoted the film as daring and provocative. The strategy worked. Newspapers debated the film for months. But behind the spectacle, Russell found herself working for one of the most controlling figures in Hollywood. Hughes carefully supervised every detail of her image. Yet he reportedly redesigned costumes personally and constantly interfered with production decisions. Russell later explained that working under such authority could be intimidating for a young actress. Producers like Hughes controlled finances, distribution, and publicity. That power meant their influence extended far beyond the film set. Many actresses during the studio era learned that refusing the wishes of powerful producers could quickly lead to lost opportunities. Careers often depended on maintaining positive relationships with men who commanded enormous industry influence. Russell navigated this environment with remarkable confidence. She maintained a reputation for strong personal values and independence which distinguished her from many Hollywood stereotypes. In later interviews, she described the complicated balance actresses had to maintain. They needed to cooperate with producers while protecting their dignity and personal boundaries. Her career eventually flourished with successful films and a long-lasting friendship with fellow star Marilyn Monroe. Yet her early experiences revealed how easily producers could shape an actress' public identity according to their own ambitions. Jane Russell became a star on her own terms. But the path to that independence passed through one of the most powerful personalities Hollywood had ever seen. Joan Crawford. Few actresses understood Hollywood ambition better than Joan Crawford. She arrived in the film industry during the roaring 1920s and quickly transformed herself from a chorus dancer into one of the most recognizable stars of the studio era. Crawford's career was closely tied to Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, a company famous for producing glamorous stars and tightly controlling their public images. MGM believed that audiences should see its actors as larger-than-life figures. Studios therefore monitored nearly every aspect of their performers' lives. For actresses, this meant existing under extraordinary scrutiny. Their friendships, romances, and appearances could become part of studio publicity campaigns designed to promote films. Hollywood gossip columns often speculated about relationships between actresses and influential executives. Crawford's rise to fame generated countless rumors within the industry, though many of these stories were never confirmed. What is certain is that Crawford understood the power dynamics of Hollywood better than most performers. She approached her career with relentless determination. She attended social events, cultivated connections, and worked tirelessly to maintain her position at the top of the industry. Her resilience allowed her to survive several dramatic changes in Hollywood, including the collapse of the studio system and the arrival of television. Crawford reinvented herself repeatedly, delivering powerful performances well into the 1960s. Yet her career also reflected the complicated environment actresses faced in early Hollywood. Success required navigating a world where personal relationships, professional opportunities, and public reputation were deeply intertwined. Joan Crawford did not merely survive that world. She mastered it. And in doing so, she revealed how ambition and survival often went hand in hand during Hollywood's most glamorous era. Ida Lupino. While many actresses struggled under the authority of powerful producers, Ida Lupino chose a different path. She decided to challenge the system itself. Lupino began her career as a respected actress during the 1930s and 40s, appearing in dramatic films that highlighted her emotional intensity. Yet she soon became frustrated with the limited roles offered to women in Hollywood. Rather than accept those limitations, Lupino moved behind the camera. She became one of the very few female directors working in American cinema during that era. This decision alone made her a pioneer. Her films often explored themes rarely addressed by mainstream studios. She directed stories about social issues, emotional trauma, and the struggles faced by ordinary people. By choosing such subjects, Lupino quietly challenged the glamorous illusions that Hollywood often preferred to present. Working as a director also allowed Lupino to escape the traditional power structure that had dominated actresses' careers for decades. Instead of waiting for producers to assign roles, she created opportunities herself. In interviews, Lupino explained that the studio system frequently underestimated women's creative abilities. Actresses were expected to perform rather than lead production decisions. By stepping into the director chair, Lupino demonstrated that women could control their own storytelling. Her career stands as one of the earliest examples of female empowerment within Hollywood. Long before modern conversations about equality, Lupino proved that actresses did not have to accept the limitations imposed by powerful executives. They could redefine the industry itself. And Ida Lupino did exactly that. Olivia de Havilland. For decades, Hollywood studios controlled actors through restrictive contracts that bound performers to a single company for years. Breaking those contracts seemed impossible. Then, Olivia de Havilland decided to fight. De Havilland had already become famous for her role in Gone with the Wind. Yet, despite her success, she grew frustrated with the limited roles assigned to her by Warner Brothers. When she refused certain scripts, the studio attempted to extend her contract as punishment. De Havilland believed this practice was unfair and decided to challenge the studio in court. The resulting legal battle became one of the most important cases in Hollywood history. In 1944, the California Court of Appeal ruled in her favor. The decision limited the length of studio contracts and gave actors greater freedom to choose their projects. The ruling became known as the de Havilland Law, and it permanently changed the balance of power between performers and studios. While her fight was not specifically about casting couch culture, it exposed the broader system of control that allowed studios to dominate actors' careers. By weakening that system, de Havilland indirectly protected future performers from exploitation. Her courage demonstrated that even the most powerful studios could be challenged when artists refused to surrender their independence. Olivia de Havilland did more than win a lawsuit. She changed Hollywood forever. Marilyn Monroe. No star better symbolizes the complicated relationship between glamour power and vulnerability than Marilyn Monroe. Monroe rose from a difficult childhood to become the most recognizable actress of the 1950s. Her performances in films like Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and Some Like It Hot made her an international icon. Yet Monroe later spoke openly about the harsh realities she encountered while trying to build her career. Early in Hollywood, she attended countless meetings with producers and casting agents who evaluated not only her talent, but also her willingness to play along with industry expectations. When a reporter once asked whether actresses were asked to compromise their dignity to get roles, Monroe answered with disarming honesty. Her response suggested that such requests were hardly unusual. Despite these pressures, Monroe gradually fought for greater control over her career. She founded her own production company and negotiated contracts that allowed her to choose more meaningful roles. This move shocked many executives who believed actresses should remain obedient to studio authority. Monroe's determination proved that even Hollywood's most famous symbol of glamour possessed remarkable intelligence and ambition. She refused to remain a passive creation of the studio system. Her story remains one of the most powerful examples of how actresses began challenging the structures that had controlled them for decades. Marilyn Monroe may have been Hollywood's brightest star, but she also became one of the voices that exposed the shadows behind that light. The golden age of Hollywood gave the world unforgettable films and timeless stars. But behind the glamour lived stories of courage, resistance, and survival. These actresses revealed truths that studios tried to hide. Their voices helped change an industry, and their legacy reminds us that even in Hollywood, silence never lasts forever.